What's up, guys? A winning night last night. Hey, 4-2, 3-0 in college basketball. Felt really good. The NHL probably should have been better than 1-2. Probably should have gotten at least two of those games there. Pittsburgh Penguins, they were down 4-2, which was not looking good, although I think the game was probably statistically closer than that made it look, although I actually haven't looked, but they tied it up at 4-4, sent it into overtime, so they had all the momentum at that point. It looked like they were going to do it, and no, they still lost in overtime against an Islanders team that I really expected to be gassed, so that sucked. And then the Columbus Blue Jackets were kind of hanging in there the whole game. They were down 3-1 for like the entire third period, and it was like, well, they just need a goal here. Like, just get one goal, get within that 1.5 puck line. And no, they wound up somehow losing 5-1, giving up 2 goals in the final like 4 or 5 minutes or something. One on a power play. I don't even know what happened there, but that game was statistically way closer than the final looked to. Columbus, like I said, they statistically played. I think they won like all the like major statistical categories, if I remember correctly. Maybe they got outshot by like 1 or 2 shots, but I think they had a much higher a number of hits, so they were the more physical team, and they had a higher face-off percentage pretty significantly. So that score is not indicative of how that game went. We move on to today. We actually have the NBA returning tomorrow, I believe. The NHL has 5 games, but I'm really just not interested in playing these games. I'm more interested in college basketball, where I actually see a lot of angles here. First one, some of these lines have moved, by the way, so that's unfortunate because these lines, man, sometimes they come out and they just start moving right away. This one has not moved, but I'm going to be on the Citadel plus 4.5. Why the hell are you on the Citadel, man? Why are you playing the what is this? The Southern Conference, the SoCon. Ken Palm actually has this right in line with that at a spread of 4. He has Mercer, only the slightly better team, only ranked like 8 ranking spots higher than Citadel. There are a few reasons why I like this game, and it's not just because I'm going to take the underdog with 2 teams that play a slow tempo here. So I don't think there's going to be really a tempo clash in this game, a tempo discrepancy. Both of these teams are slower paced teams, so I think that is kind of a wash there, although it means that Citadel as a road team might not be totally out of their element. But Citadel has the worst record, and people are going to look at this. People kind of know the name Mercer a little bit because they've shown up in the tournament. They had that upset of Duke in the tournament, however long ago it was. But the Citadel, I mean, they're one of those military schools, and people just see them as one of the worst teams in the Southern Conference, which is true. But they're actually way better than VMI, even though they're only one game ahead of VMI in the conference. Citadel, speaking of VMI, they actually beat VMI in their previous game, which I kind of like that because I think that's kind of a momentum starter for the Citadel after they had a long loss streak, 6 losses in a row. They beat VMI, so I just think that that's kind of a confidence boost. You beat the worst team in the conference, prove that you could still win, and that's going to, I think, take some motivation for them into this game. The one hesitation I have is that the Citadel did win against Mercer at home. So I don't know if you're going to consider this to be a revenge spot. This Citadel is actually better than the record makes it look, really. Although both of these teams have kind of ugly records. They're both kind of near the bottom of the conference. So the Citadel with a worse record than Mercer. Citadel was actually favored in the game against Mercer. And Mercer was actually winning that whole game. And Citadel somehow pulled it out in the end. So I don't know. Is that going to make this a revenge spot for Mercer? I'm not so sure because Citadel might also look at it and say, well, Mercer's the only other team that we actually were able to beat in the conference. So that might actually give them a little bit of extra confidence again. And they actually beat Mercer coming off a loss at VMI. So they were kind of embarrassed coming off VMI. So I don't know if there's something about playing VMI and helping boost your mental state there. But of course, that was an embarrassing loss, whereas now they beat VMI, but I still think that's kind of a confidence boost coming into the game against Mercer. So the revenge angle I kind of throw out just a little bit just because it was the Citadel winning at home in the first matchup, and not every revenge angle is going to get there, although I think I'm on revenge and some of these other ones. But the reason why I think the spot is as good as it is because of what Mercer is coming off of, man. Mercer just beat Samford. Mercer is really not that good a team this year. They've been kind of uncompetitive in some of these games. against some of the better teams in the conference. So, of course, they've been better. I mean, they have won some of them, too, and they have been a little bit better at home, I guess. But even at home, they've lost some of these games by double digits, and it hasn't really looked good, although they started playing a little bit better. But one of their recent wins was against VMI, so who cares about that? And then when they beat Furman, I don't know if Furman was in a bad spot in that game, too, were they? Furman was coming off a real close call against UNC Greensboro, so kind of they were kind of in a little bit of a bad spot there. So you might be able to kind of downgrade that win over Furman for Mercer as well. But the spot is all about what the spot is right now. Mercer upset Samford, man. Samford only had one loss in the conference. They're atop the conference. They're the best team in the conference. That's a huge win for Mercer. And now, even though Mercer did lose to the Citadel on the road the other time they played them, which, by the way, was also a game off of a game against Samford. So both of these teams are coming off of playing the same opponent coming into this matchup as they did in the first matchup, which is kind of weird. So it may be that playing VMI is a much easier matchup than playing Samford. So maybe it will gas you a little bit more by playing Samford. But now Mercer's got to be in a letdown spot after beating Samford, the best team in the conference, a huge win. And they have all big games up next, too. They have UNC Greensboro next, who's second in the conference. Chattanooga after that, who's just behind them. Greensboro also their final home game of the season. And then they close the season against Furman, who is the fourth team in the conference. So they have this game sandwiched in between the top four teams in the conference. Even though like I said, they did lose to the Citadel once, and this is their most winnable game left. Are they really going to be totally focused on this, or are they going to be focused a little bit more on Greensboro coming into their house? Because I think Mercer, they know they're not really going anywhere. I think at this point, they're going to be in the conference tournament, I think, because I think the entire conference gets into the conference tournament, so I think they're going to be kind of starting to focus on that as well, focusing on that and focusing on the bigger name teams, just trying to do something. So I mean, they just got their biggest win of the season against Samford. So what am I saying? Like that was their huge win of the season. Now they're coming off that. I think it's a letdown spot, and I think it's a sandwich spot with Greensboro up next in 3 days and all the best teams in the conference up next. So I'm on the Citadel plus 4.5. That's play one. Play two, I actually have 5 college basketball plays. See if I can get this done. Looks like the line's moved against me a little bit here with Murray State at Southern Illinois. Southern Illinois has gone up from 4 to 4.5. I got Murray State plus 4.5. Ken Baum, again, he doesn't have these teams separated by much in the rankings. He has Murray State 14 ranking spots lower. He's got this at 4, a line of 4. Murray State did just play Drake, which is a pretty big game, but they got stomped by Drake by 23 points. So I don't think Murray State's going to be in any sort of hangover, a letdown spot. I do, however, think Southern Illinois is going to be in a big letdown spot because Southern Illinois, they're coming off beating Indiana State, who has now lost 2 in a row. And I think Indiana State was kind of in a hangover spot, man, after they lost to Illinois State. When you're in a spot like Indiana State was and you have like this long win streak. I think they were only a 1-loss team in the conference, and they hadn't lost since they lost to Drake on the road, like way back earlier in the conference play. Indiana State finally lost again, and when you lose a long win streak like that, sometimes that just hangs you over into the next game, and it was kind of a tough spot for Indiana State having to go on the road and lay points at Southern Illinois, so I don't think they were quite ready for it. But Southern Illinois got the win. That was like basically Southern Illinois' big win of the season, man. Even though they did beat Oklahoma State earlier, a Big 12 team, we're really going to care about that. Oklahoma State sucks, and I think that was a bad spot for Oklahoma State. Indiana State's actually way better than Oklahoma State. So this was like a win of the year type of thing for Southern Illinois. They pulled off the win against Indiana State, who was still ranked at the time, and they knocked them out of the rankings. Now they get Murray State, who they already beat on the road. They already won at Murray State on the road, and they got Evansville up next, but it's not really a sandwich because they haven't faced Evansville yet at all this year, so I don't think it's a look ahead or anything like that, but this is a major letdown spot, I would say, in my opinion, coming off the win of the season, big win over Indiana State, and they got Murray State, who they already went into Murray State's house and beat Murray State as, I believe, a 3.5-point underdog or something like that, so this line's kind of in line with that, although those lines kind of indicate that Murray State's actually the slightly better team, although Ken Baum has Southern Illinois as the slightly better team. But this line in this game at 4.5 does kind of indicate that Southern Illinois is the slightly better team. So the line has moved a little bit, but I think the line making Southern Illinois the 4.5 favorite, I think, is right in line with where the power ratings are now. Maybe they've shifted since that first matchup a little bit, but it is legitimate revenge here, I think, because it's that road reversal revenge angle where when you're Murray State like this and you had this team, Southern Illinois, come into your house and beat you in the first game, they beat you and you were favored on your own floor. When you're then an underdog going into their house, that tends to be a pretty big motivator in college basketball. So we have that aspect, the road reversal revenge angle on the side of Murray State, in addition to Southern Illinois, I think, being in a pretty big letdown spot coming off Indiana State. And they might be a little bit less focused on a Murray State team that they already beat on the road this year, whereas Murray State's going to remember that they lost that game. And Murray State's been playing some pretty poor basketball in the conference for a while now. They started off good. They won the first 3 conference games, but since then, they're only 4-8 in conference or something like that, and they're coming off a blowout loss, even though it was to Drake, who is actually now, KenPom has Drake actually power rated 1 spot higher than Indiana State at this point, with Indiana State in that 2-game skid there. He actually has Drake slightly higher, which is crazy to think about there, but Murray State lost to Drake. No shame in losing to Drake, but they did lose by 23 points. So I think this could be a bounce back spot, and they only have Valpo up next. They're not going to be looking ahead to Valpo, I wouldn't imagine, or even to Belmont the game after that. They do close on the road with Indiana State, but I think they're going to be focused on Southern Illinois, a team that beat them in their own house, and Southern Illinois in the letdown spot. So I like Murray State plus the 4.5. The next one I'm on is Texas San Antonio, UTSA +6, even though I think KenPom actually has this line around 8. The line actually opened at 7. South Florida laying 7 points, and it's dropped all the way to 5.5. So I would say you got to get on this soon, if at all. I see some 4.5s cropping up there now. It looks like it's 5.5 is the majority of the numbers out there now, though. I was able to find a 6 before it continued dropping. It looks like the line is moving in the Texas San Antonio direction. I think this is a bad spot for South Florida. I keep saying I haven't gone against South Florida that often, although I did in their last game, although I keep saying they're a very, very overrated team. And I still think that they are. KenPom has them as the 100th best team in the country, although he has UTSA way down at 286. So certainly UTSA is the worst of the 2 teams here. But I think this could be a pacing collision spot where South Florida, I mean, they play a slower tempo than UTSA does, even though South Florida doesn't play particularly slow. But South Florida, they're one of the luckiest teams in the country still, at 30th in luck in KenPom's ratings. Their strength of schedule is still really low at 200 in the country, which isn't good. He has them ranked below 100 in both offensive and defensive efficiency. So not very good in any of those stats, really. And UTSA, he has much less lucky, at least at 163. He actually has them facing a stronger strength of schedule than South Florida at 178, and has both of them with a pretty weak non-conference strength of schedule as well. So they both have kind of weak schedules, but UTSA's overall strength of schedule actually a little bit stronger. So they've actually played a stronger in-conference schedule to this point than South Florida has. South Florida has beat up on all the worst teams in the conference, as I keep saying, even though they do have a few wins against some of the better teams in the conference. UTSA is, of course, the worst team, especially defensively. They're terrible. But offensively, they're actually not that much worse than South Florida. Defense is their problem, but UTSA speeds up the game a lot more than South Florida does, at 49th in tempo on KenPom. So I think this could be a little bit of a pacing collision because UTSA is going to want to play way faster than South Florida likes to, even though South Florida is not particularly slow. UTSA is way faster. So I do think UTSA might be able to ramp up the tempo a little bit here and throw South Florida off their game a little bit. UTSA has played a bit better at home than they have on the road. I mean, they've played some pretty competitive home games, really, noticeably taking Florida Atlantic to overtime at home. And they did take Memphis to overtime as well, but that was actually on the road. So they've had a couple of big games at home, but this is a bad spot for South Florida, dude. I mean, not only are they coming off the game that I was just alluding to, where South Florida just beat FAU, and that almost nearly clinched a conference for South Florida as far as the regular season is concerned. They are now, well, there's still one game atop the conference ahead of Charlotte now and 2 games ahead of Florida Atlantic. So they do still have a little bit of ways to go, but they're in the driver's seat in the conference after the regular season. They do still have 5 games left, so they haven't really clinched anything yet. But even so, that put them in sole first place in the conference, a huge win over Florida Atlantic. Florida Atlantic, they knocked them out of the rankings as well, which, again, is another thing that I said that Southern Illinois did to Indiana State. When you get a big win like that on your own floor and you knock a team out of the rankings, that's a huge win. South Florida, I think they stormed the court there. That was a huge, huge win against FAU, who I believe is still the best team in the conference, power ratings-wise. South Florida, much, much worse. That was actually an upset for South Florida of like 5.5 points or so at home. Huge win for South Florida. Now they go on the road to face UTSA, who they already beat at home in an absolute blowout. South Florida took care of them completely, led the whole game, beat them by 17 points, blowout win against UTSA. So are they really going to pay attention to UTSA here when not only are they coming off a huge win over FAU, but they have SMU and Charlotte up next. They have the 2 other top teams in the conference. So this game is sandwiched in between the 3 of the other top 4 in the conference with South Florida. So the other top 3 teams in the conference all surround this game for South Florida, and they already beat this UTSA team, who is not very good and is at the bottom of the conference. So I don't think this is going to be a full focus spot for South Florida here. I think it's a sandwich spot in a major way, having this game surrounded by FAU and SMU, who KenPom has both of those teams ranked in the 30s. I believe, power ratings wise. He actually has SMU not even that much further behind FAU. So SMU is really the sneaky team in this conference, not South Florida. South Florida is the team that everybody's putting in their bracketologies now, and I think is overrated. And I still don't see them getting into the tournament here. They're still gonna have to win the American Athletic because their strength of schedule is so weak, and I'm not sure that they're going to be able to do that, even though they do keep winning, and they're on a huge win streak. So I'm stepping in front of that train here, although I stepped in front of the Auburn train with Kentucky, and I'm going to talk about that in a second, when Auburn had that ridiculous home win streak where they were winning every home game by double digits. I stepped in front of that locomotive. It's not the greatest thing, but sometimes you do it. South Florida, I think, has like 10 wins in a row or something, but I'm stepping in front of it. We don't need UTSA to win the game outright either. We just need them to cover this number. A 6 at home, and I think they're going to maybe have the pacing advantage here, and it's an awful, awful spot for South Florida. It is a sandwich spot. So I like it. I like UTSA here, and UTSA is coming off a pretty ugly loss, really. They just lost at Temple, who is the team that was, I believe UTSA was ahead of Temple going into that game, and now UTSA has fallen into the bottom spot in the entire conference below Temple. So that's kind of embarrassing, man. Losing to Temple, I don't think they're going to want to let that stand. Maybe they were in a bit of a sandwich because that was a second straight road game. They just played a decent game at Charlotte where they kind of hung around at Charlotte, who's a much better team. And then they had this game up next in South Florida and North Texas after this. So it's possible they were not fully focused on that Temple game, and they lost the game to Temple. It was a fairly close game, but losing to Temple, the other like bottom team in the conference with you, that's pretty embarrassing. So I think UTSA is in much more of a bounce back spot. They're in a spot that's much more conducive to having focus here against the top team in the conference and a team that already really beat you pretty handily. So I think the focus spot is all in the UTSA side for all the reasons I just stated. And for South Florida, it is certainly not. It is a sandwich spot for South Florida. We continue on. I've got a lot of college basketball here, man. LSU +7. As I just mentioned, I was going to be doing something with Kentucky here. This line looks like it's 6.5 at most spots. The public is only going to want to be on Kentucky in this game, man. I mean, Kentucky is certainly the better team. KenPom does have them as the better team, but I think what is Kentucky ranked, though? They're ranked 17th. KenPom has them a little bit lower than that at 22nd. Kentucky, very, very good offensively and one of the fastest teams in the country, but they also have a really poor defense at 82nd, but LSU basically is kind of a mirror image of that, even though KenPom does have LSU way down at 77th. He actually has this game only being a 4-point win for Kentucky. So even though he has them separated by about 50 ranking spots, he does not have Kentucky winning this game by that much. These teams, like I said, they're pretty similar styles. It's just that Kentucky is the somewhat better team, of course. But both of these teams are teams that don't really play good defense. They both speed it up. LSU actually also one of the faster teams at 58th in tempo, although Kentucky is, I believe, faster than that, like I said, right? But LSU actually not very good offensively or defensively, down at 82nd in both. So Kentucky is certainly the way better offensive team, but both of these teams pretty poor defensively, and Kentucky actually worse defensively than LSU, but Kentucky also a speed-up team, so I don't think this is going to be a pacing collision, and if anything, maybe LSU might, I don't know if they would slow the pace down a little bit because they are the 58th fastest team in the country, but Kentucky the 17th, so it's possible LSU might maybe slow the pace down just slightly in this game to try to get it more away from where Kentucky likes to play super fast pace. But look at what Kentucky is off of, man. They just went into Auburn, that thing that I just said, man. I was on Kentucky there, and they went into Auburn and stopped the Auburn home locomotive, man. But I think you can kind of downgrade that win a little bit because Auburn was coming off that statement 40-point win over South Carolina, even though South Carolina is nowhere near as good as where they're ranked. Like I said, South Florida too, but South Carolina way, way overrated. And KenPom probably has them still around like the 50th best team in the country or something like that. But Auburn absolutely destroyed them. That was a huge statement because people were saying that was going to be a big game between two top 15 teams, and Auburn won the game by 40. Then Kentucky was coming in, and Auburn just did not play a very good game. Kentucky really stopped Auburn's offense, which is crazy that Kentucky, a horrible defensive team, was able to slow Auburn down to 59 points. But Auburn actually had a key injury in that game, too. They lost Williams, I believe, in the game, who's one of their best players. So Jalen Williams, I believe, he went down in the game, and I don't know how long he's going to be out, but that's a pretty big injury for Auburn. So I think even though Kentucky did win the game by double digits and they were winning the whole game, so it was probably still the right side for Kentucky to cover that game there. So I won that game on Kentucky plus the 8.5. That win looks too good now, man. So now Kentucky's coming off going on the road and beating Auburn, the 13th ranked team in the country. And KenPom has Auburn way higher than that, has them at 5th in the country right now. So that's a really, really big win for Kentucky, a huge win. But like I said, you can take a few things away from that because it wasn't a good spot for Auburn, which is why I went against them. They were coming off a 40-point statement win over an overrated South Carolina team. They lost Jalen Williams to an injury in the game. So you can take those things away from it and maybe downgrade that win for Kentucky a little bit. But I also think this is going to be a sandwich spot now for Kentucky because they just went in, beat Auburn. And who do they have up next after they play now a second straight road game at LSU, which not really going to be the easiest place to play, really, in my opinion, to have to go to LSU. And Kentucky, they haven't been very good on the road in conference this year, really. They won by 2 at Florida, which actually that's looking pretty good because Florida is a pretty good team and ranked now. But aside from that, they lost at Texas A&M, lost at South Carolina, who's really not good, only won by 6 at Arkansas, and then blew out Vandy on the road. But it's Vandy. I mean, Vandy sucks. So beat them by 30-something, 32. And then the big win on the road was the one they just had against Auburn, at Auburn. So they did that. Now they have a second straight road game at LSU. And who do they have up next? Alabama, who's at the top of the SEC standings now, is ranked 13th in the country, and KenPom has them right behind Auburn as a 6th ranked team in the country. So this is a sandwich spot, man, for Kentucky. Coming off that giant upset win at Auburn. Huge win against a team that looked unstoppable at home, too. Nobody's going to want anything to do with LSU here, man. Kentucky looks amazing at this point. People are only going to want to lay these points with Kentucky. It almost looks a little bit short, but I think the line's too high as KenPom has this line only at 4, having to lay 7 or whatever with Kentucky. That's quite a big number there. And even though LSU, they're coming off a pretty good stretch of games as well, really, where they, even though they lost to Tennessee and Alabama, you can't blame them for losing those games. They then went into Florida and only lost by 2, but it was a bad spot for Florida, I believe. But LSU played pretty tough at Florida. And then they had a second straight road game, and they coming off, so they're not in the best spot, really, but Kentucky's in such a giant sandwich spot that I just don't care. LSU in their last game went into South Carolina and beat South Carolina 7.5-point underdogs, and South Carolina was beating them by double digits for much of the game, like throughout the second half. And LSU somehow came all the way back and won that game. So it is a big win for LSU, mostly because LSU isn't that good. But South Carolina, way, way overrated as well. But LSU being back at home with Kentucky coming into their house, it's not like LSU is going to lapse in focus. The question is, are they going to have enough left in the tank? Are they going to be able to put in a big enough effort in this game against Kentucky? I think they will. I think both of these teams played on Saturday, so I think they have enough time off here playing in the middle of the week that it's going to be kind of a normal, like midweek type of game here where Kentucky is in the much worse spot, man. They're coming off a much bigger win that everybody's talking about. They have Alabama up next, second straight road game. This is a sandwich spot where for LSU, even though they're coming off a pretty nice win over South Carolina, the win looks better than it actually is because South Carolina is still way, way overrated and overranked. This is still Kentucky, a big name team and a ranked team that just beat Auburn coming into your house. I think LSU is going to have focus in this game. So I like LSU getting a generous helping of points at home. I was able to find a 7 on this game. I don't know if those are still out there. It looks like it's mostly 6, 6.5. Although 7's a key number, but we're doing that one. And then the final game before I get out of here. This game has moved quite a bit, man, unfortunately. I got on this before the line really got away from us, but this is another one of those unranked home favorites against a ranked road underdog here, and that's New Mexico against Colorado State. New Mexico, I laid 5.5 with New Mexico, and the lines looks like it opened at 4, and it's gone all the way up to 7 now. So 7 is basically the number everywhere now, which is very unfortunate. I apologize for that. I took this overnight, and the line has shot up way more than I thought it would. I mean, KenPom has New Mexico rated the better team, but not by much, only by 4 ranking points. So he has New Mexico winning this game by 4. So that was close enough that I wanted to do it to lay the 5.5. But 7 is definitely pushing it. So I don't know. At 7, I don't think I would want to play it, but I like it at 5.5. I apologize that the numbers gotten totally out of control here, but New Mexico is the better team. But I think the books are also kind of catching up to this unranked home favorite thing that's been cashing at like 67% or something this year. And as I mentioned, we had a couple of them. We had one last night with Utah State that I was on that won. Whichever one I was on before that, the day before that also won. I think Virginia Tech. So this is an angle that just keeps cashing. And it's like the books are trying to adjust, I think, and still can't make the line high enough. But I think 7's a bit too high here. But it looks like the books are trying to adjust for that phenomenon. But in the Mountain West, I think it's been more exacerbated than in any other conference. It seems like Mountain West these teams have such a strong home court in the Mountain West. It's like the home teams win virtually every game almost in this conference. Although New Mexico actually hasn't been that good at home. They did lose at home to Boise, although it was off an absolute stomping of Nevada. So they were in a bad spot when they lost that home game to Boise. And then they did lose to UNLV, which that's pretty inexcusable, losing to UNLV at home, but they did have Nevada and San Diego State and Colorado State this game all up next after that. So maybe they just didn't completely have focus because the ranked teams that have come into their house, though, they have beaten them. The best teams that have come into their house, they've beaten all of them at home by double digits. San Diego State, Utah State, and Nevada. So I like the spot for New Mexico here. They're coming off kind of an ugly loss, even though it was against San Diego State, which, of course, San Diego State still one of the best teams in the conference, but they beat New Mexico by double digits at San Diego State. Wasn't a good game for New Mexico, but New Mexico shot very, very poorly. Like, it was an outlier shooting percentage on both sides. New Mexico only shot 35.5% and 22.7% from three-point percentage. San Diego State somehow shot 57% from the field and 41.2% from 3. That is not a typical performance on either side, on the part of either of those teams. New Mexico had a really particularly poor shooting night, and San Diego State had a particularly good shooting night. But New Mexico's coming off that basically wire-to-wire loss by double digits. So now they're coming back home. They don't have anything up on the horizon. Even they have Air Force up next. Who cares about that? This is their biggest remaining home game, because their remaining home games after this are just Air Force and Fresno. They're going to want to beat Colorado State, man. And not only that, but they lost on the road to Colorado State this year. So there is kind of a road, not a road reversal revenge angle, excuse me. There is a little bit of in-season revenge here because they did lose at Colorado State. But again, like I said, the home teams seem to be winning virtually all these games here. So I like New Mexico. I think the public is going to think that this line doesn't look right. How is New Mexico laying these points at home when they're the unranked team against a ranked Colorado State team? Colorado State's looked good recently, and Colorado State already beat New Mexico once. Yeah, but that was at home, like I said, and Colorado State's been on fire recently. They won 5 of their last 6 games or something in the conference here. But if you look at those wins, almost all of them were against bad teams. They beat Fresno. Well, not almost all of them, but they beat Fresno on the road. They beat Boise at home, which is a good win. But, I mean, Boise's a little bit lower tier than these upper echelon teams here. Even though Boise's second in the conference right now, I think Boise is not as good as Utah State, San Diego State, Nevada, Colorado State, or New Mexico. So they did beat them at home. They beat San Jose State. And in their most recent game, they beat Utah State. And of course, they did beat San Diego State at home back before those games as well. So that's a good win at home for sure. But coming off a big 20-point blowout of Utah State at home, Colorado State, now they have to go on the road, even though they're used to playing in high elevation, which New Mexico is also a high elevation location. These Colorado teams, of course, Colorado State, also a high elevation team, but New Mexico also is. And New Mexico is just a weird place to play, man. Playing at the Pit, they have this weird arena that's kind of up like in the mountains, and it's like kind of isolated, and it is. And I think it's actually underground as well. So you have to go up into these mountains and then go down like into the pit, into the weird, like kind of almost underground type of venue. It's a very weird venue at New Mexico. So they have a pretty decent home court advantage, even though it hasn't totally panned out this year. Like I said, they have a couple of losses that are maybe games that they should have won, but they were against pretty good, well, one was against a decent team. The other was, I think, just kind of in a bad spot, the UNLV one. But even so, Colorado State's coming off a huge win. They had lost at San Diego State the game before that, and then they crushed Utah State at home. Now they're going to New Mexico, and I think New Mexico, they're going to have some revenge in mind here as well, man. Utah State shot particularly poorly in that game, 38.6% against Colorado State. Colorado State, even though they're a very efficient offensive team, they're actually a pretty balanced team, good offensively and defensively. The other thing about Colorado State, though, is that they play a slow tempo. Colorado State, and I believe New Mexico plays a much, much faster tempo. So that's going to, I think, also kind of lend itself to a difference in this game where Colorado State, the first time these two teams played, kind of played more to Colorado State's pace a little bit. It played, I think, a little bit higher pace than Colorado State would want to, but now they're going into New Mexico's house, man. And New Mexico is one of the fastest teams in the country. New Mexico is 6th in tempo, according to KenPom. So I think that bodes well, even though Colorado State has faced a tougher schedule. Colorado State, the more balanced. Well, actually, both of these teams are very balanced. What am I saying? He has both of these teams ranked in the 30s, both offensively and defensively in efficiency. And Colorado State only ranked 2 spots lower than New Mexico in the rankings. He has so, but he does have New Mexico by 4 in this game. But I like it at 5.5. I don't really like it at 7. But for all those reasons, I think it's a much better spot for New Mexico, trying to exact some revenge on Colorado State. New Mexico is coming off an ugly loss, even though it was to a good San Diego State team. Colorado State's coming off a blowout win at home over a Utah State team. I don't know if Utah State was ranked at the time or not, but that was a big home win for Colorado State. These home teams have been really good in the Mountain West, and it's another home team who is favored, an unranked home team favored against a ranked road opponent. So, and the rankings don't quite indicate like where these teams are actually at, because like I said, KenPom has both of these teams ranked in the 20s, and New Mexico slightly higher than Colorado State. So I like New Mexico at -5.5. I don't really like them at 7, but that's going to do it for me, man. It's long video, long amounts of college basketball here. Those plays, once again, are Citadel +4.5, Murray State +4.5, UTSA +6, LSU +7, and New Mexico +5.5. Let's get it, man. We had a pretty decent day yesterday, especially in college basketball. Let's continue it, man. Let's have a winning day. Come on. Let's Please, let's have another winning day here. Oh, God. It's hump day, so let's start getting over the hump. We got to recoup from those bad weeks. We got to start doing it. Peace.